Here is $10 million worth of marketing advice in under 10 minutes. So let's dive right in. Number one, we want to make sure that we're solving one main problem for one specific audience. I see a lot of companies who are just going way too broad with what they're doing. They're trying to sell to everyone, they're trying to sell everything. In all likelihood, you're not Google, you're not OpenAI, you're not serving everyone and doing everything for everyone. If you're just a basic service-based business, service-based online business, you want to really niche down and be specific about what it is you do. You want to have one problem, you want to be making that problem your absolute bitch and serving a small TAM with it. That's how you run a very successful online business, in my opinion. So that is where I would start. Number two. Now, this is a little bit counterintuitive. I think a lot of people prefer not to do this, but I have leaned really into this over this past year, and it's generated our company over $10 million, and that is disqualify as much as possible. So a lot of people are kind of needy. They have a lot of scarcity mentality surrounding not wanting to push away potential prospects. I actually like to do the exact opposite, especially if you're selling at high price points. You know, if a lot of our companies sell at a 20K plus price point, that is inherently very, there's a lot of people who can't afford that at the end of the day. A lot of our companies sell to a wealthier demographic, and in order to do that, you have to disqualify a lot. You want to make sure your sales team calendar is prioritized. They're speaking to people who actually have the funds in order to work with you, and if you want to do that, you have to disqualify. If you're selling to rich people, it has to be obvious that this is not for poor people. It's that simple. So disqualify as much as possible. That's done very well for us. Okay, number three. This applies to freelancers, it applies to businesses. I've used this in my email marketing company over the years, and that is positioning is everything. So positioning is very, very important. A lot of people do not really know how to leverage positioning in the market, but think about it like this. Why do people buy a Lamborghini as opposed to a Toyota? A Toyota is very dependable. You can put 300,000 miles on it, use the cheapest gas. It's never going to break down. You can use it for the next 50 years if you want to, versus Lamborghini, it costs like 100 times as much money. The upkeep is expensive. One set of repairs is worth more than the Toyota itself. So why do people use Lamborghinis, or why do they put more money into that as opposed to a Toyota? It's positioning. It improves their positioning. It makes them appear wealthier. For guys, it helps them attract women. It helps them improve their positioning among other men. People are always thinking about their positioning in the market, and anything you can do to improve other people's positioning is very important. I try to think of everything that I'm doing, everything I'm selling in the standpoint of, how am I improving the client's positioning? Or how am I improving my own positioning? For me, selling email marketing over the last couple of years, a service that largely became commoditized. How could I stand out from other email marketers who are charging 1/4 of what I'm charging? The main way I did that was by positioning myself, by having myself, connected to big name people. When people think of certain big name influencers, they think I'm the email guy for that person. That is how positioning really allowed me to charge significantly higher prices, to retain clients longer. It's very, very important. Have to learn how to leverage positioning. So next, this is a bit more of a step out. You have to zoom out a little bit on this one, but in business, you really want to catch rising macro level trends. You want to be positioned with things that are going to improve over the coming years rather than, get worse and decline over the coming years. I didn't really recognize the importance of this early on in my career, but after a couple years of being in the game, seeing people who've, succeeded versus people who have failed, I've noticed a lot of times people who are able to catch these rising macro level trends, whether it's intentional or not, a lot of times are very successful. Like right now, for example, it's October 2025. We have been in the crypto world, the bull market has really taken off. Bitcoin has reached PRs multiple times this year. ETH has been at near all-time highs several times throughout this year. If you're riding that macro level trend of something like crypto, for example, that is very, very helpful. It's a topic that people are already thinking about. they're already, it's topical for them, it's on their mind, they're considering buying it. You're just positioning yourself into the conversation that's already going on in their head. Right now, AI, very topical. Who isn't worried about AI? Every kind of professional out there is thinking, how is this going to automate my job? What am I going to be doing in 2 years if my job is gone? Do I have the skill sets to be able to get by, to be able to support my family, whatever the fuck it is? That is why a lot of companies that sell basically things that help people learn AI are doing really well, because it's catching a macro level trend. Versus if you look at something like, if I'm looking at something on the decline, I would think of like marketing agencies. Marketing agencies were really, really hot back in like 2020. It was this kind of gold mine of a business opportunity. How is it nowadays in 2025? Not really anyone wants to start a marketing agency these days. It's kind of on the decline. The market's been burned by it. A lot of people who are idiots just kind of got into the space, gave it a bad reputation. That is on the downward trend from a macro level, whereas something like crypto or AI, those are, rising macro level trends. So you want to be able to catch trends as early as possible. Okay, next. This one is also super key. That is finding, especially if for an established person who has capital, who has a decent skill set behind them, you really want to stick to higher barrier to entry models that other people have a harder time infiltrating. It's really hard to stay long term in a business model that just has like no barrier to entry. For example, back what I was just talking about now, marketing agencies. Marketing agencies got kind of messed up over the last couple of years because literally anyone could start them. Anyone with a credit card, a laptop, and an internet connection could start a marketing agency over the past 5 years, which means you have tons and tons of people trying to start these things. Versus if you look at something like starting a software company, maybe not nowadays in 2025 because with vibe coding and stuff, it's changed. But think back like 5 years ago, starting a software company wasn't really easy. You had to hire devs. Most people don't know how to code, so you have to hire a dev. Devs aren't cheap. You have to work with those devs over time. You have to front a good amount of capital up front before the thing gets going. Then you have to run ads. You have to hire CS people. It's a higher barrier to entry model. But on the flip side, think about it like this. What are the valuations on SaaS companies compared to marketing agencies? 1,000,000 times higher, significantly higher. The enterprise value on a SaaS company is much better than your basic like service-based business that anyone can start. So if you are someone who has capital, who is good at sales and marketing, good at leadership, managing people, you should really aim for business models that have a higher barrier to entry. They're more sustainable, long-term, and from a marketing standpoint, much easier to sell a lot of times because you have less competition, less people diving into it. Okay. Lastly, this is actually one of the very first marketing lessons I ever learned back when I got started running ads back in 2017, but that is sell to the rich or sell to the masses. You don't want to be caught in between there. Most of the companies I've worked with have focused on selling to the rich because rich people have money, they can afford, higher ticket items, they can pay very large invoices. So I like to focus on selling to the rich. If I wasn't going to sell to the rich, I'd go kind of mass market, things that you have a ton of people that can buy. So don't really get caught in between. I don't like to sell to kind of like middle class people. Either make it so that like everyone can buy it. Like a basic clothing brand, for example, that is selling to the masses. Or on the flip side, a high-end clothing brand. I'd rather be like like a Brunello Cucinelli, something like that. But you don't want to be kind of in that in-between. That creates a lot of issues. So that is $10 million worth of marketing advice in under 10 minutes. I've leveraged this within my own companies over this past year to generate over $10 million. Insert this into your own business, see how it does. Let me know in the comments below now, and thanks for watching.